Landlord entry. Landlords must give notice 3 days before entering a rental unit, including the time, day, and reason for entry. They, with consent, can enter a unit 30 days before an expected entry, as long as the tenant says that's okay. Landlords can provide for monthly inspections based on the tenancy agreement. If that's something that's in the tenancy agreement, you're kind of cooked. You've already signed on it. So they get to inspect every month. Landlords may enter to perform homemaking services as agreed to under the tenancy agreement. So perhaps this is a long-term care home, and under those circumstances, there may be an agreement under the tenancy agreement that those individuals are allowed to come into the property, clean the property, maybe talk with the tenant, make sure that they're okay, that they don't need anything medically speaking. And so that's permissible as well. The landlord may enter for those services, and those services alone. Landlords may enter an abandoned rental unit without notice. If it's being abandoned, and it's being abandoned for, I believe, 60 days, the landlord can enter to check out the property to make sure it really is abandoned. Landlords may enter to protect life or property under the circumstances of an emergency. When I say emergency, this means a 5-alarm blaze. This means somebody is actively dying or being harmed. This is not something like, I forgot my iPod in there and I need it right now. This is a serious emergency for which someone would call 911 and give a very screaming type of attestation to the person who's on the line. Like, that's an emergency. If you, the tenant really, I mean, like I said, they have an expectation of privacy. They have an expectation of nobody being allowed to unreasonably disturb or interfere with them. So if the landlord needs to enter a property, it has to be under exceptional circumstances. The tenant has a right. The tenant has a right to privacy. The tenant has a right to be free from unreasonable, search and seizure of their property by the landlord. That's actually the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but that only applies to the government. Tenant and guest entry. The tenant can have anybody they'd like on the rental property effectively, as long as they are breaking the law or busting up the property. It really shouldn't matter that much to the landlord who's coming in and out. If they're concerned about something illegal, they should make a police report. Landlords shall not unreasonably restrict access to the rental property by the tenant or their guests. They cannot lock out the tenant out of the unit. They cannot lock guests out of the unit. They cannot create some system where guests have to sign in. Not appropriate. They cannot unreasonably restrict access unless there's been like a shooting in the area or something super serious, super serial, where they need to know who's coming in the property. Then maybe it's acceptable, but your mileage may vary. Contact your lawyer, paralegal, or resolve it if you think that's the case. Obligation to repair. So the landlord needs to follow health, safety, and housing standards. And not only do they have this high standard of care, but they also need to have regard to the age, the character, and the location of the rental unit. So if this is a 50-year-old unit, there's less of an expectation. But if the unit is 100 years old and there's substantial needs for repair and there's been asbestos scares in the past and et cetera, maybe it's been a meth lab in the past, they need to take that much extra care over the property, having regard to that circumstance. If a landlord breaches safety standards, health standards, housing standards, it does not matter when the tenant became aware of this. It does not matter. They can still bring a claim. They can still bring a claim. Ignorance of the law in Canadian law is no excuse. Might be an excuse in America, might even be an excuse in the UK. I don't think it is. But it ain't an excuse in Canada. Tenants must maintain reasonable health, safety, and sanitation standards in the unit. Pretty straightforward. We all know what a messy unit looks like. We all know what a clean unit looks like. And in terms of quantifying what this looks like, it would be, I think, the minimally accepted amount of cleanliness. So, if a tenant has a whole bunch of clothes strewn and they don't have a chance to clean up this and that, it should be acceptable to the landlord. But if there's dirt that's causing insects to show up, if there's, wildly inappropriate hygiene standards that's going to get somebody sick, if they're perhaps hoarding on the property, then that goes way past the typical, like, this is unclean, didn't get a chance to clean it. And in that case, the landlord could bring a claim.